Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, where we explore the intersection of narrative design and game development. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today we're going to dive back into the pool of narrative design and explore interactive storytelling. Specifically, we're going to discuss how designers create player-driven narratives and the impact that player choices have on the stories we experience inside of video games. My guest today is Ryan Kaufman, a narrative designer whose work on games like The Walking Dead has helped shape the landscape of player-driven storytelling. So let's get into it. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks, Gerald. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to chat with you today about, obviously, narrative design, interactive storytelling, branching narratives. These are all very close to my heart, so I'm really glad you said yes.
Yeah, no, mine too. I think we're just right there on the same page. This is my bread and butter. This is what I dream about at night and what I wake up and do in the morning. So yeah.
Right on, right on. Well, let's start off with a nice foundation. I'd like to start with your origin story. How did you get started in the industry? How did you fall in love with storytelling, game design, writing, and what excites you about where's that passion come from?
Yeah, I started in the games industry sort of in a happenstance way. I'd gone to school for creative writing, so I've always been a writer. But I thought when I graduated, I'd never make any money at it. You know, the classic story. I'd be doing something else and writing novels at night. But a friend of mine was a games tester at LucasArts. So back in the days of TIE Fighter and Full Throttle and the Golden Age. And I was looking for a job and he said, hey, do you want to be a tester? And I got involved with that and gradually sort of worked my way up through the company and became a designer. And the story DNA at LucasArts was really strong. I mean, we had Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman and Hal Barwood, Ron Gilbert, all these people who were doing these amazing stories. And even kind of drifted into the Star Wars stuff, you know, and Star Wars is a great sci-fi property, but obviously it's rooted in the sort of the monomyth and the story aspect of it is really strong. So I was lucky to get my start at a place that really respected story. And then from there, I did a couple other things, but I made some key sort of relationships and friendships at Lucas, including Dan Connors and Kevin Bruner, who later founded Telltale. So later on in my career, they were up and running with Telltale, and I wanted something new, and I talked to them, and they were like, "Yeah, you know, come aboard." They said, "We're just about to put the finishing touches on this new game. It's called Walking Dead. We don't know how it's going to do." You know, there was a big question mark about it. Back to the Future was their big bet at the time, and Jurassic Park, and Walking Dead was kind of a cool property. And I'd read the comic. I don't even think the show had come out at that point.
Right.
So it was an interesting time to join up. And so Walking Dead exploded and I helped out with that. That was amazing. And right after that, Wolf Among Us, which I was involved with. And and then we were off to the races. So I was at Telltale for quite a while. And that's kind of where the real interactive narrative, you know, that's where the rubber hit the road because you got philosophy and all that, but then like, how do we put these games together and make this kind of mechanically all work? That was the job.
Wow. Well, before we move on, something that jumped into my head when you were talking about LucasArts is there is a famous story of how George Lucas brought in Joseph Campbell to help him with structure. Were there any traces when you were at Lucas, any traces of, you know, George Campbell's work being passed through the culture? Was it ingrained there?
Yeah, to a certain extent, there were a few of us who were keyed in on that part of it and knew that that's where his inspiration had come. And so we tended to look at that as a template. And even if we weren't telling the hero's journey, we were at least trying to tick off, like, are we telling some kind of story that has a resonance with that? So yeah, it was in the air.
Cool. Okay, before we dig into the core stuff, I do like to also ask, did you play tabletop when you were growing up? Were you a D&D player or a board game or?
Yeah, totally. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So like when I was like 11 or 12 or something, I got my first exposure to Dungeons and Dragons. And yeah, I absolutely loved it and created, you know, dungeons and did sessions with my friends. And, you know, we went out in the hills and ran around and pretended we were rangers and fighters and all this stuff. So that was a huge part of the interactive storytelling education I'm sure we'll come back to that. I know you have some thoughts on that about that kind of the magic threads. But yeah, that was a big thing for me.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk narrative design for a bit here. When working on a branching narrative like The Walking Dead, as you mentioned, and this is the age-old question, but I want your take on it. How do you balance player agency with the direction or the rails of that story? What are the challenges between letting a player shape their narrative and getting them to a meaningful, resonant place?
Um, yeah, that is the age-old question. The thing that it started to emerge for me as a solution to that was to look less at plot or like where's the story going or how is it going to land, and more theme and its cousin tone.
Mm,
Theme and tone really became these things that helped keep the story going in a direction that made sense, like in a storytelling way. We humans are always looking for that, like, what is the shape of this story or where is it going? I want to know where I am in it, even if I don't need to know how it ends. And theme can really help with that. Like if you're talking about found family, like that can go a lot of different ways plot wise, and you allow for a lot of branching and player agency, but you know that you're telling a rewarding story about found family. You're like, that's my theme. And so I'm going to continue to return to that. And that to me ended up being a really great, fruitful way to look at how to tell a story that like resonated and had some meaning and had some structure without the structure being overbearing or overriding player agency.
that makes sense. If you maintain kind of a North Star, then you can let them wander around, but you're going to end up at the right place, which is theme based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that you can construct a satisfying ending out of that, or several satisfying endings, because theme often allows for different expressions of the theme. Like, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Clever, clever. Well, I mean, along the way, character development plays an integral part of in any story, but especially in interactive stories. So I guess how does that player choice, that player agency impact character arcs? How much do you allow it to impact a character arc and allow that character to feel dynamic?
Yeah. The best version is like the sitting around with a dungeon master who can really just, as the NPC,
Right.
respond. However, we don't have that luxury. We have to have pre-scripted responses. And so you're really trying to read the player's mind and try to, you have to know a lot about the psychology of people and try to figure out what are the four or, three or four different ways that they might be interacting with a personality, if it's an NPC or a character, um, how are they going to react to them? What kind of relationships might be formed? So it really helps to know like how people tick. And then for, a playable character themselves, that's often also a tricky kind of proposition, especially if you have a character like Batman, right? There's only so much character development that Batman is going to undergo. And there's only so much development that players like want. You don't want your Batman to end up in such a far off, branch where you're like, I don't recognize Bruce Wayne anymore. Even if I made him that way, you're like, it feels weird. It breaks it at a certain point. So you lean pretty heavily on the characters around them, the ensemble cast, and try to use those as reflective house of mirrors, kind of, here's how you're playing and here's how it's affecting them. Like, I think for the Telltale Batman game, we did a pretty good job of using like the Joker to help you understand how your choices were affecting other people, and essentially sending him on one of two kind of divergent paths. And that felt okay to do that. Like it was both a little bit transgressive, but also felt like within the universe, like, yeah, this could happen. So yeah, no, you're like trying to stretch it without breaking it. It's like silly putty or something. You're like, how far can I stretch this without it just coming apart?
You want to do something new and engaging, but not mess with the player fantasy that's at the core of someone like Batman or Spider-Man or
Yeah. Yeah, because that's why they plunk down their, $30. They're like, I love Batman or I love Spider-Man. I wanna play that story, but yes, like you say, it's like show me something new, but don't bust it open completely.
that's why we don't have a Batman Stardew Valley.
Yeah.
Your first point makes me think of my marketing background. When you talk, do you ever reach out and talk to marketing folks who understand the audience and spend time and money and energy identifying audience and figuring out psychographics and habits and behaviors? Is that part of the process when it comes to writing and development?
Yeah, absolutely. And doing some of that market research is really important. In my last project, which is still under NDA, I can't talk about it, but I can say this much: we really wanted to focus on more on female gamers, like the women who play games who are underserved. So we did a lot of research to figure out like who's playing, who are they, what do they want. We thought we knew, we thought we had an idea, but you want to ask the people themselves, the players themselves, and try to figure out like what am I missing, or what voices are not coming through. And yeah, like marketing and research really, really helps with that, because that's all they think about,
Yeah.
and their feedback is really important and can sometimes give you an insight you just never have, like working by yourself on a dev team. It can be very insular. And so marketing is often the first line of defense. If they don't have, they don't have a dog in the hunt, or whatever the phrase is, like you can just say, hey, what do you think of this? And get like the fresh approach.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Hearing the stories about collaboration between departments and the sparks that come out of that, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's been massively helpful over my career. I've never shied away from marketing. I mean, honestly, like it's so disappointing to put out a game that doesn't resonate with players that you're almost doing yourself a disservice if you're like trying to avoid marketing, because they're going to tell you. They'll be often the first people to tell you if it's working or not, so save everyone some heartache and ask, put it out there, be brave.
Amen. Love it. Okay, well, let's dig into some technical rubber meets the road stuff. I guess when it comes to crafting branching narratives, interactive storytelling, what are some of the big challenges? And then, so we have a positive, what are some of the tools or techniques you found or developed to help you with those challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, and probably not just me, but everyone would say, like, it's scope, because we want to offer so many different branches, but every single branch costs X amount of dollars, and you only ever have X amount of dollars to put against the game you're trying to make, or time, one of those two. And so trying to scope things without making them feel scoped as you're playing it, you don't want to, it happens, but you trying to avoid players feeling like, oh, I hit the edge of that. I would say that's the number one challenge.
Yeah.
And then the tools to mitigate that. Yeah.
Working on that.
Yeah. It's hoping that will eventually work out. I will say there's a certain amount you can get in front of with using some sort of flow charting tool, or just some basic like branching skeletal structure that lets you play through the branches ahead of time, even before art has been put on it or music or any of that stuff. You can sort of get a sense of, do I have enough agency? Am I offering the choices that need to be offered? And you put it in front of somebody who's never seen it and let them kind of mess around with it, and they'll tell you straight off like, oh, I didn't want to make that choice, or that kind of thing, where you get this great feedback that if it comes early enough, hopefully you can scope things and massage it and make it all work.
Is there space there for tools like it or Twine or Artisy or something, or just testing just that part of the branching narrative without all the other elements?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like I would hate to do it without kind of testing it out on something like Twine first. Sometimes you're lucky enough, like at Telltale, we had a tool, an internal tool within the company that was built to do that, and you could set things up pretty quickly. And it was essentially a flow charting tool that allowed you to see choices and branches and all that stuff fairly quickly. So yeah, I think those are valuable tools organizationally, but also just to test out, like, does this work? Does it make sense to go through it? Does this flow make sense?
There was a conversation I was in once around testing narrative early. Like, how early can you test narrative? Can you do it in the ideation stages and the part of the slice? And also, have you ever tried using tabletop role playing to test a narrative choice that you might have later used in a game?
I've never done that, but I've heard of people doing that, and I would do that if, I mean, you use any tool you can get, like whether it's paper prototyping. I've done that before, where
Cool.
essentially, yeah, you build a tabletop game, but like not as complicated, and the systems aren't there. But yeah, essentially, you're just kind of playing through it, role playing style. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like you never stop testing narrative, even from your very first pitch. You have to like pitch something high level, you know? It's like, oh, it's Alice in Wonderland meets aliens or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it starts with this, does your core concept make sense to other people? Like as a story, does it click? And then you're adding on, and then you put it in twine, and then you're like, okay, now does it make sense now? You know, and then you keep adding on. But I feel like it never stops being kind of people kicking the tires of, saying, does this make sense to you as a story? Like, is it something you can get your head around? I feel like sometimes we're stand-up comics, like we just keep refining every time we get up and do a set. You know, a joke works, a joke doesn't work. You're tweaking it and refining it until they rip the game out of your hands, and that's it. But yeah.
Right on. Okay, well, to bring this all together, I guess what would be, if you were speaking to a young junior or somebody trying to get into, or somebody who's just learning to improve the craft, what's the one or two top tips you would give them? What's some wisdom that you picked up over the years?
Let's go back to the tabletop thing where I started. I think playing tabletop game, especially like D&D or Pathfinder, with a really good DM who understands it, allows you to see how story can be crafted by players, but also guided by somebody with theme and tone and the ending in mind. You know, a really good, GM or DM can help you get to the awesome Dragon's Cave without kind of putting you on a leash and getting you there. And that is an amazing thing to observe and to be a part of. I think a lot of young writers are great at sitting down and writing their own stories, and, learning to find your own voice is really important. And this is all done in a solo kind of sphere. But the collaborative part of it is probably the most important bit for games, because you can be a solo writer, novels, screenplays, and be really good and succeed. But if you're a solo writer in games, you're going to tank hard because it's incredibly collaborative. And the more you learn about like how to work with other people in the creative sense, but also how to create stories that survive kind of players being collaborative with you, you'll do great.
That's fantastic advice. You can help me settle a debate on this topic. I'm of the belief that if somebody wants to excel at narrative design, you kind of need to become the DM and the world builder. And I've had other people say, no, you can be a player and learn enough that way. But where do you fall on that? Should like somebody who wants to be really good at narrative design, do they need to be a DM? Do they need to world build and plot structure along the way?
It's probably a good idea to see if you like it. Like,
well, there's that.
yeah, it's honestly, it's not for everyone. Like interactive narrative design is a weird niche of writing, storytelling, even if we want to broaden it that way. And I've certainly met some people who are incredibly talented, but like to work in the solo aspect. They're like, I have a vision and my storytelling is dependent on my particular voice and my particular vision. And like, that's cool. That's how we get great films and great novels and stuff. Like, you don't get that otherwise. But yeah, go be a DM for sure. Everyone should do it, right? Like, it's an amazing experience. And it will also teach you like, ooh, I really like the collaborative aspect. Maybe I like it even better than working by myself. And if you find that, then you tend to be like, okay, you'll do great as a narrative designer. But maybe if you're like, it was okay, but they didn't get the story that I wanted to tell. Maybe you're like, I'll just be a writer. That might be your focus. Or you might be into like, I'm a cinematic writer for games. Like I want to write the cutscenes.
That's cool.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like you can write some awesome cutscenes, but maybe you're not like the narrative designer type. But it helps to know who you are.
That's a fantastic answer. Well, that wraps up the core stuff. I do have a philosophical question that I like to ask everybody, as you've hinted to earlier. Excuse me. That question is, in my opinion, there is a magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but improv, comic books, novels, tabletop board games, all of this, where we can all just hang out. We get along naturally. There's a shared fellowship. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what's the magical thread that holds that together?
You mentioned improv, so it's funny. Like we did improv classes at Telltale, and that was something that I pushed for because I feel like that is what do they call it, the magic circle or something like that.
Sacred circle, magic circle. Yep.
Yeah, like that concept of we all step in there and we're all like trying collaboratively to create something, but we don't know what it is. And that's like part of it. We're not like forcing it somewhere. We're given a prompt or something like that, and we're really playing off each other. And you cannot do that unless you're like really connected to the people. And improv teaches you to like stop driving toward an outcome and start listening. And that creates that like very human connection. It's a very rewarding connection. Like you say, everyone has to get along in the sense of you want to play together and play by certain rules, but also open yourself up to what other people are doing. And it reminds me a lot of like how we played when we were kids. And that's how like Dungeons and Dragons for me was not only like playing at the table, but there was a huge aspect for me that was like, let's take our imaginations out and get on our bikes. And now our bikes are horses, and now the hills are like, wherever. And that imagination, like kind of, let's continue the story together. I think like what you're talking about is hearkening back to how we played when we were kids, and it was a lot more open and a lot more vulnerable, but also a lot more like rewarding and, just fun. So I do agree with you. Yeah, I think that intersection of story and game, like the game is kind of, we have a rule set or we have a framework. So it's not just anything goes chaos imagination, but we also have like story where we're trying to kind of make an adventure that we can look back on at the end of the day and go, that was super fun. Let's do that again.
Very cool. That's a good answer. I've been asking that question for like 3 seasons now, started 3 seasons here. And every now and then I get surprised or something different, but then I sit back afterwards. I'm like, every single answer is kind of everybody's looking at the same thing, just from a different angle or a different aspect of it. And it's like, it's like I'm going around firing off sonar, trying to figure out the shape that's in the middle. And we're slowly getting a big picture of this amazing thing where we're all creating something that shares a space, but it could be games or film or acting. And it's kind of cool. I love hearing the different points of view.
Yeah, it is an amazing question, and it's not something people think about every day, but it invites like reflection. What is it? What is it about that? Like we all just internalize like we love story, we love game, and go from there. But like, strip that back and ask why.
Why? Love it. 7 whys. You got to ask why 7 times to get to the heart of it. I don't remember where I read that somewhere. I read too much.
C-pop.
That's 7 licks.
Yeah, right. I'm confused.
All right. Well, good answer. I'm going to start pushing you out into the cold here shortly. But before we go, I do like to open up a little space. Is there anything you want to promote, anything you're working on or have worked on? Or conversely, where can people find you online to follow you?
I'm on Blue Sky right now. That's pretty much the only place I am now. And yeah, just starting to follow people on there and follow narrative designers. I think you can look up Ryan Kaufman. But my handle is like Writer Ryan, as like one word. So yeah, look me up there, follow me, and I'll follow you back.
Wonderful. Well, that is it. I'm going to start pushing out the door. But before you go, I'd love to give you the parting words. Do you have any final words of wisdom?
Oh my God. No. Too much responsibility. I can't. Put something in cool later on. Put it and fix it in post.
It's that time again. Time for me to usher you out the door and bid farewell. But as always, thank you for once again taking the time to sit down at the table. If you enjoyed today's show, please don't forget to follow the podcast on your platform of choice and leave us a review. And if you're looking to extend the conversation, come join us over on Discord, where we have a place to share tales, trade insights, and plot the next great adventure. Until we meet again, keep creating, exploring, and sharing those stories and worlds. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.